let's talk a little bit more about layers. So what you're seeing right now, this entire image only looks this way because there are three layers put together and actually combined together using blend modes and changing opacity. So what does that really mean? So in order to show you, I'm gonna kind of hide some of my layers and show you my layers one at a time. So on the bottom layer, I have just a regular image of a sky. That's what I picked out first, and I put this at the base. And if I have this layer selected, if I change the opacity, then I see less. Those checkerboards indicate that there's something transparent going on. So right now, if I were to save my work as it is right now, it'll be blank. And I don't mean blank as in white, it'll just have nothing. So if I placed it into a new image, you would see nothing. But if I brought it in, you will see partial clouds and you can probably still see whatever's behind it. So opacity is just a fancy word for transparency. So you can ghost your images, make them ghost like and transparent. All right, so the next thing that you might want to know about is the blend modes. So right now, if I go to normal, then and then change my opacity for this layer back to 100%, it'll basically just cover up my first layer. Um, but because I had it on a different blend mode, um, you know, it allowed me to see both images at the same time, which is pretty much the whole point of the blend mode. So I had it, I believe I had it on color burn, and it has a really cool effect. And all I did from there is actually change the opacity down to like 79. That's a pretty random number, but I guess after playing with it, I was like, I think that's pretty good, and, and I just left it there. So with my last layer, I found an image. Let's see how that looks when it's normal. This image is basically just a gradient. I think it's a gradient, image of a gradient that I found on the internet, and I just placed it in, and I used it as like a way to add color to this already really cool image. And once I added that hue to it, that hue blend mode, it just made this pop a whole lot more. And it took it to a whole nother level, a whole different feel. And I didn't even have to change the opacity for this one. So there's a few things I want you to notice. With my layers, um, if you didn't pay attention before, the way I could hide my layers and see each layer one at a time is that I press this button. This eyeball is how you hide layers. And if you look, and you'll notice that each layer has a different name. So how do you name your layers? You double click the text and then begin to type. So I can just call this gradient 1 or whatever. So yeah, I'm just gonna take away gradient texture and just call it gradient. So now, let's say I wanted to create a new layer. How would I do that? I would just come down here at the bottom, and I'm actually gonna take this off. So now you can see it better. Right here at the bottom, there's a plus sign, and now I have a new layer, and I'm just gonna name this layer new, just to show you how to type in it. Now, be careful, because if you double click away from the text, this will pop up. This is your layer style. We're going to get more into that later, but you don't need to know anything about layer styles at this moment. So just if that happens, just press cancel and then type or double click the text so you can type in the right spot. So now, let me show you how to lock your layer. Let's say I wanted to move my night sky layer, but I didn't want to move my gradient layer. So how can I do that? I can lock this layer and my top layer, my new layer, and even my bottom layer. I could just go ahead, just for safekeeping, even though I wouldn't touch that because I have to get past my night sky to touch it. But just for you know just for locking sakes, I'm gonna lock everything but my night sky. And now I'm gonna press Command T, and I'm just gonna shrink my night sky. And or I can make it bigger or rotate it or whatever. I can make whatever changes I want to that layer because I have the other layers locked. Now, if I didn't have those other layers locked, this is what would happen. I'm not even selecting my night sky anymore because I have to get past the gradient layer first. So locking your layers, oops, always a good idea. The lock button is right here. All right, so let's talk about how to duplicate a layer. So let's say I like the gradient layer a lot and I wanted to duplicate it and to just change the blend mode. So I can right click and then select duplicate layer, and here I can actually change the name to gradient 2, press OK, but this time I'm going to change it to a different color mode like overlay or normal, and then just change the opacity, just make it foggy or something, I don't know. Or better yet, let's say if I went to hue and I just press Command T and I rotated this layer, now I have some weird funky stuff going on and it's pretty cool. Yeah, so wow, this always surprises me. You never know what's gonna happen. Now so we talked about adding layers, we talked about hiding a layer, locking a layer, naming a layer, duplicating a layer, but what we didn't talk about is how to group two layers or two or more layers. So let's say because these are both gradient layers, I want to group them together. I could select one, hold down my shift key to select the other, and then now I could create a group right here. I could press Command G or Control G on a PC, or I can just press create a new group right here, this folder right here, and now I have a group with two unsuspecting layers inside of them. Now if I double click this, I can change the name of the group and just call it gradients, and I can lock that group. And notice that if I lock the group, everything inside the group is locked. If I hide the group, everything inside the group hides. It's pretty much a new layer with other layers inside of it. Last thing I want to show you dealing with layers is, let's say I am in my new layer, right? And let's create something that is not a regular pixel image. So that will either be text or a vector image. So I'm gonna go with text for right now. So if I type something, I'm just gonna type sky, and I'm gonna press Command T to transform this, and I'm gonna scale it. I'm gonna press enter, and what I'm gonna do, notice that this layer, it says it's showing me that it is a type layer, which means that it is not pixel based. So if I wanted to change that and make this pixel based, and make it an image just like everything else, then what I would do is right click and I would go to rasterize type. And now if you notice, it just looks like a regular layer. So even if I were to, go to transform, well, no, that's not a good example. If I were to get a paint bucket and change the color that way, then I could, change the color of the text by paint bucketing. Now, keep in mind, if it was regular text like before, paint bucketing my text, see, I can't even do it. So it would not be a possibility. But because I rasterized the layer, this text is basically just like this brush, me painting with this brush. It's the same, it's made out of the same materials. These are pixels now. So it's pretty cool what you can do with layers. One last thing I want to show you is, actually two last things I want to show you. How to delete a layer after looking at this, and how to ungroup. So I have this grouped. Now I don't want it grouped anymore. I could right click and ungroup, or I could press Command Shift G and ungroup them. Then I can grab my gradient 2. There's there's a couple of ways that I like to delete. I can just press backspace and it deletes, or I can grab it, drag it to the trash can and it deletes, or have it selected and click the trash can, and then it'll ask me, hey, are you sure you want to delete this? And I'll press yes. Now, other thing I wanted to show you was how to export this. So let's say, let me go to this layer. I just want to change this to white just because I know it'll look a little bit better. All right, so anyway, let's say I wanted to save this as a export it as a JPEG or a PNG because I want to put it on the internet, right? So I would go to export, and I could export it as a PNG. And the great thing about PNGs is that, they have a higher resolution, but the other thing is that they are, you are able to make them transparent. The thing about JPEG is that they can't be transparent, and I'll show you what I mean in just a second. So, but the two things that they both have in common is that when I save my work as a PNG, I will basically not have any of these layers anymore. If I save it as a JPEG, I won't have any of these layers anymore. So how would that look? Let me show you. If I right click and go to flatten image, then everything will look just like this, and I would have no layers. That's how my file will be. It will be compressed. There will be no layers. All of this will be one if I save it as a PNG or a JPEG. So make sure that if you are going to export your file as a PNG or a JPEG or any flat image, that you have the PSD version or the Photoshop version of this file. So you'll have two files, the Photoshop file, and that you can work in and change make adjustments to your file. Then you'll have your file that you use to show everybody, and that's going to be your JPEG or your PNG. Now, let's say I have a file, let's say I have a file like this one. Let me show you something. So if I go to export, and go to save for web. This is my PNG file. My PNG, notice, remember I said that the checkerboard in the back indicates that it's going to be transparent. That's a good sign. That's my PNG. But if I save it as a JPEG, that transparency no longer exists. Now it's just been filled with white. And yeah, that's it. Now I could change my matte from white to black, but I don't think it would make a difference. Either way, if I put none, it would still be white by default. So just keep that in mind. JPEG, no transparency. PNG, transparency. And I would just press save and save it where I wanted to save it, however I wanted to save it. I can change the name of the file and all that good stuff. But I don't want to do that, so I'm just going to press done. And speaking of done, we are done with this section. Congratulations, and I'll see you on the next one.